Hey, everybody. Welcome back to The Collective. We have another fantastic show planned out for you today, and I am very excited. Clay, welcome back, man. It's always good to see you.
Pleasure.
We're going to be on here more often, just so you know. I'm going to like harass you quite for a while, but
Yeah,
as well,
exactly.
I'm going to try and get you and John at the same time, so you guys can we can all have a chat. Um, on a side note, while I'm jibber jabbering, by all means, make sure you like the show, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell. That way, you get your email in the morning every time that we go live, which is every day, of course. So, as a precursor, I'm not a doctor. Sean is not a doctor. Clay, you're not a doctor. So anything we do say is our own personal opinion. Do take it as such. And if you have any thoughts or questions on it, by all means, put it up in the comment section so that we can read them and discuss them and enter them into the conversation. Any thoughts or questions before we begin? Good, or dive into the topic there, guys.
I'm good.
Good,
Yeah, good to
good.
go.
All right. So, topic of the day: fear and courage. And I wanted to talk about these two together. We've talked about fear before, we've talked about courage before, but we've kind of touched on the fact that they are kind of one and the same, but or they rely on each other, I guess. Let's start on just a general thought on the connection between fear and courage from each of you guys, and then we'll kind of see where the conversation goes from there. Clay, what do you think?
Yeah, that's no small task. Fear and courage. Just the small pull to drag from there. Uh, yeah, I don't know. It seems like they are two of the opposite sides of the same action. Of whatever is incoming. You can't show courage unless you are able to overcome fear. So I guess that would be my small hot take on it.
There you go. Sean, what do you think?
Yeah, like Clay, I mean, we could make it super simple or we could make it really complicated. And for now, I think maybe while we're chatting, chance you could pull up a simplistic definition of
Mm-hmm.
fear and one of courage, and then we can tease the details out. But to some degree, I think you don't have to experience fear yourself, though everyone does, and you don't have to experience courage yourself, though everyone should. I think that you can passively observe it or actively observe it and start to get a better sense of what fear and what courage is through other human experiences or observing it in other humans. Certainly, the definition of courage that I have in my mind is defined by people that I've seen do courageous acts. I don't think of anything that I've done as particularly courageous, but I've seen it in many others, and that's what I use as an idealized definition of courageous. So maybe while Chance is pulling up the definition, do you have any thoughts on that, Clay?
No, no, I think it's courage is it's one of those things. You can see it in a small child, and you often wonder, if courage is something that needs to be practiced. Do you, as a small human, over time, if you're encouraged to be courageous, which is find things that you may find fearful, like the boogeyman under your bed, and go look. Is courage practiced and honed over the years, or is someone just inherently born more courageous than others? You could take that conversation anywhere, really.
And that
Yes,
is a
indeed.
great conversation, that's for sure. Do you have anything there, Chance?
Yep, I got one right here. So we got fear is a noun, and it defined as a very unpleasant or disturbing feeling caused by the presence or imminence of danger. It is a state or condition marked by this feeling, a feeling of disquiet or apprehension, which I think is a pretty good definition. I think there's some more to that, but courage, the state or quality of mind or spirit that enables one to face danger, fear, or vicissitudes with self possession, confidence, resolution, and bravery, which I think are pretty excellent. I do like this. This is quite interesting, and at least in my head, this is what's clicking. A very unpleasant or disturbing feeling caused by the presence or imminence of danger. But I think it goes farther out to that into an implication of danger, even to the point that we will make up our own fears, or we will have a fear of something that doesn't exist, and therefore it's more of our, again, as we were talking earlier, it's the interpretation of that fear or the interpretation of that something that creates the feeling rather than the actual thing. I think. Any thoughts on that?
Well,
Glenn?
when you were reading the definition, the
Sean?
first, oh, sorry. Well,
No,
when
go
you
ahead.
were reading the definition, the first thing that I thought was, yeah, that doesn't work for me, because a person can have fear but not be facing danger, at least as I define danger. And so I think it is more nuanced than that, and you are kind of cracking into a chance with maybe the individual who isn't facing danger has somehow conflated something minor into a dangerous thing in their mind, and that is what is causing the fear. So if you have a fear of public speaking, you're not under danger. You're just under the danger of embarrassing yourself, or you're just under the danger of exposing yourself. And so, like this podcasting gig that we're all doing right now, by gig, I mean we're just trying to be helpful to anyone who's tuning in, anyone who checks this out 1,000 years from now. Hopefully, our time was well spent. So, this thing that we're doing, I don't like it. I I didn't want to do it, and here I am facing that fear of doing exactly what I'm doing. And to some degree, I guess that's courageous in a weird way, but I don't think of it that way, because I don't think of this as dangerous. I just think of it as uncomfortable, putting myself out there or exposing my thoughts, my opinions, my experiences to the world that I don't understand. I mean, there's people who will listen to this in the future that I'll never meet. I don't know how they work. I don't know what's going on in their heads. So it is uncomfortable to put these ideas or this conversation out there for me. But I'm not like feeling courageous by doing it. So maybe I just haven't categorized my fear high enough of, go, I'm so fearful about talking into the microphone right now that I feel courageous for doing it. But I don't feel like this is a danger per se. It's just a bit exposing.
Yeah,
So, yeah.
I agree with that. Yeah, I feel like danger in the definition is kind of like the low hanging fruit. It's easy for a person to read that definition and understand. Okay, yeah, fear is imminent danger, but to the psychological sense that I think we're all kind of touching at is what makes something fearful for most people. You know, myself, I can use myself as an example, and I'm sure you guys have heard before, is fear of the unknown. It's the unknown results of the podcast that bring fear to people, or it's say a jiu-jitsu competition. It's not rolling. You've rolled 1,000 times. You've done jiu-jitsu in the gym 1,000 times. It's when you show up to the competition, you have no control over those results. So it's the unknown. So facing the unknown is courage, and you can't have like one without the other, in my opinion.
I really like that. I had heard once that all fears are based around the fear of death, and I think that that they are basically, well, I've come to the conclusion, not really conclusion, I guess, more the thought is that if every fear is a subsidiary there of another fear, leading back to the fear of death, which is the unknown. That is the ultimate unknown, right? Nobody knows what happens after you die because you're died. You've died. So it's interesting that we can almost siloize them, as Sean said. You know, like you have the fear of podcasting, but is it really the fear of podcasting, or is it the fear of being of exposure, or being in front of people and being vulnerable, or is the vulnerability tied back to, you know, being unarmored, right? And therefore now you are more physically vulnerable, even though you're just standing in front of a microphone. So I think that's an interesting thing. I just pulled up kind of a definition as to how it says fear is a natural emotion with a survival mechanism, which I think is an interesting tie between two, is that The fear is the emotional side of it. There is a survival side of it that you have, increased heart rate, sweating, high adrenaline levels, extreme alertness, that kind of stuff. When you are really fearful or you're feeling a lot of fear, but that can come based on any number of things too. So I just think it's interesting to separate those into there's the physical side of it, the actual biomechanical, the physiological response, but the emotional side of it, which is really where fear and courage, I think, kind of collide. What do you guys think, Sean?
I think that you're onto something, but I do believe it's a complex topic. And so what I mean by that is I'm certainly not as fearful now as I was when I was a young man. And so over time, you just learn how to manage life a whole lot better. Now, when I start facing some kind of fear, like podcasting as an example, it's not because I'm under imminent danger and therefore, like, my brain understands what I'm about to do when I start podcasting. It knows that I'm not being shot at. It knows that there isn't a tiger jumping out of the ceiling. It knows I'm not under imminent harm threat. So my biological soup doesn't respond in a fight or flight manner because I know what I'm stepping into. This is my, 460th live chat this year. It's not a big deal in the sense of I'm under threat. But my biology is still going to respond to a certain degree. It's just that now it doesn't respond the way it used to 450 live chats ago because I've started to normalize things now to some degree. The tiger that used to jump out of the ceiling on my back unannounced, that fear, well, now I know there's no tiger that's going to jump on me during the podcast. So those biological autonomous responses have been narrowed down so that they are minor as compared to when I first started podcasting. So I think that over time, the physical action of a harmful thing that will create fear is different than the psychological action of facing the unknown called podcasting. And that biological response over time starts to become normalized, or taking the abnormal, making it normal. And then it's just a matter of time until you're kind of in the groove, as I feel. That's just my first thought on that.
Clay, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, fear as the movement towards death. And that, for example, to hit Sean's point, if I am a young child and I'm afraid of the monster under the bed, but I look under the bed 450 times and the monster isn't there, you start to learn what to fear and what not to fear. And then that view, as you get older, it broadens. And then hopefully that physiological response as an 8-year-old on the first time, it changes to 38-year-old you. And then you no longer fear what's under the bed, but fear as a movement towards death is fear will always be present. So it's almost like fear isn't something that happens. It's a homeostatic state of just being human. Fear is just part of being a human, and how you approach that in life is courage in its own sense. So, yeah.
Interesting. I had a thought on, what you were very in line with what you were just saying, Clay, is that the fear of the unknown. As you said, you've now looked under the bed many, many times, right? So, do you think that the courage portion of that is just the concept of checking every single time over and over and over until it becomes superfluous? Because you have the tiger that's going to attack Sean in the ceiling. He's not actually going to check the ceiling. He's just come to a realization that there is no tiger. But that's just through time and experience, and that unknown portion is being it's being explored without being physically explored, if that makes sense, right? Because, I mean, technically, a tiger could leap out of your ceiling. Have you checked your ceiling, Sean? Is there a tiger in your ceiling?
Well, to your point, I don't need to, and here's why. Because if you have a fear, your next job is to defeat the fear. And how to how to defeat it or how to face it or how to engage the fear. It means you got to play with it. You got to look under the bed, or you got to look up to see if there's a tiger gonna jump out of the roof. And so facing the fear or engaging in the fear cycle is the first step, I feel. Now, courage is the back end of the process. We'll call it the equation, in my opinion, anyway. But I do believe there's a middle ground, that nebulous middle ground, where someone is in the process but not moving through the process. And what I mean by that is, to Clay's point, if you're scared of the dark, and I mean, lots of kids are or were. I mean, I didn't like, I thought there was a monster under my bed for a while there when I was a kid. So I get it. I'm not down with the monsters under my bed. So at some point, and this was me, I don't know, maybe Clay, you're different, maybe Chance, you're different, maybe every kid out there is different than me, but at some point, like, I had to face my fear. I had to look under the bed for the first time, as an example. And then once that's done once, then you get to decide how long you hang out in the nebulous gray zone of fearfully always checking. Is it still there? Is it not there? Am I? And maybe it's 1,000 times later, you've hung out in that nebulous gray zone between fear and courage. And as I see it, this is just using this analogy to make the point. The courageous part is when you stop looking under the bed. That's when you've moved forward. You've moved through the problem. So you can be fearful and you can face the fear. But once you move through the fear, like, screw you, monster. It's my imagination. I'm going to kick your arse. That's when courage is engaged. That's when you've moved through the objective. You've fought through the objective. You consolidated 200 meters beyond, and you've started forming up your patrol base or whatever. And so I feel that there's a fear phase. There's a possible nebulous gray zone of inaction. And then there's the courage to move through the objective, as it were.
Clay, you got any
Interesting.
thoughts?
Oh yeah, that's it's very interesting. I like that because it's almost like you can have gradations of courage. So you can have like little mini or meta moments of courage, but that's not the ultimate destination of reaching courage. It's like you have the fear, and then you gradually approach the fear, and then eventually, whenever you've looked under the bed 400 times, you reach courage. Now I'm not even going to look anymore. Now I know, I've checked, I'm resolute, I'm moving forward. I like that. That's a really really solid way of looking at it.
And I think a really cool part about that is, and I'm just playing off of my own little life here, is when I had to move through that process as a kid, and gained the courage to think, whatever, doesn't even exist. That's a non-factor. Now it's my job to retain that courage and pass it on to my kids. And so when they are in that same situation, that fear, nebulous gray zone, courage cycle, we'll call it, it's my job to help them move through that more efficiently, more effectively, but not without them learning the lesson themselves. And so I think that there's another aspect to the fear and courage loop, and that is, we as mentors or guides or coaches or leaders or parents, what have you, it's not our job to make it so seamless that someone doesn't face the spicy adversity of kind of synchronizing with these moments themselves. I don't want to rob my kids of these lessons. It's just my job to facilitate the lesson so it doesn't sting quite as much, while still helping them gain the 100% awareness of the loop, as it were.
That's a great point in that, like, if you really wanted your kids not to be afraid of the dark, you could have the entire house lit 24/7. Now they're not afraid of the dark because it's not dark, right? But you're not teaching them to not be afraid of the dark. You're just teaching them that it's always lit. I think that's a great point. Do you think that it's in the similar vein of like an OODA loop, where you're going to have to, see the fear, recognize that you're afraid of it, engage it directly, and then engage it enough times that you can then relegate it to a subsidiary and move on. But then you have to seek out another fear and go, okay, now I'm going to work on that one, and do that same cycle again, and then okay, now I'm going to work on that one, and just continually work these loops, these OODA loops of fear and courage, and work through each fear, and then because that way you can build your courage from one fear into the next, right? I'm not afraid of the dark anymore. You know, it's a great core analogy is, Sean, you said you were afraid of heights, but you've fast roped and, um, you know, belayed off of helicopters.
All the
and
things, yeah.
all the things, right? Jumped out of planes, all that stuff, right? You've built your conditioning to manage through the fear, and then that conditioning assists you in every stage beyond that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And in fact, yesterday, my youngest son, Keegan, our youngest son, who was at Operation Pegasus Jump with me this summer, he cracked out 4 parachute jumps this summer. And he asked me last night, "Hey, Dad, talking about fears," and I said, "Yeah, you know, I may not have said the word terrified, but I'm really scared of heights, kid." And so we talked about that a little bit, and basically, I put across that I got a couple of jobs. One is to defeat the fear within myself, so I've never ever not engaged in the task at hand that is fear or is height related. I mean, put me up on top of a skyscraper and I'll go off it if the mission requires me to. And if the mission doesn't, I ain't climbing up the freaking skyscraper because I ain't into it. And so if it's something that needs to be done, I'll freaking crack it out of the park. But if climbing up a skyscraper doesn't need to be done, thank you very much. I'll stay on the ground. And so first of all, you've got to figure out why you're engaging in the fear. And so for me, as I explained to my son last night, it's because that's what was required. That's what was asked of me, and therefore I will do. And so it's then my job to face that fear. And how do I face those kind of fears? Well, I find it a whole lot easier when I'm facing the fear on behalf of the team. Because if I was just facing it for myself, I would have maybe less conviction, we'll call it. And I'm going to keep it very high level here. But if I'm doing it for the team, I have more conviction because I add an extra 4 notches on the rotary dial for let's kick that ass. Let's get that done. I've got to do this. There is no backing out. This is mandatory. Those are the words that go through my head when I'm doing it for the team. So if you've got fears to face, a pretty good actionable item or way to approach that is to figure out why you're doing it at a higher level than just yourself. If it's for your family, if it's for your team, if it's for your neighbor, if it's for your community, if it's for your country, if it's for your clan, whatever the case is, if there's fear to face and you're wavering a little bit, add that extra little bit of by connecting it to the team, as it were.
Clay, you got any thoughts?
Yeah, it reminds me of obstacle is the way. It's a Stoic principle, but Ryan Holiday wrote a book about that. He's a pretty famous author
That's a
about
good
all
book.
those things. But it's almost as if fear could be looked at as the roadmap to self improvement or growth. If you have a fear and you know that it's something that you need to gradually attack or engage, as Sean put it, you can slowly build parts of yourself in later aspects of your life because you have overcome these small fears to become a better person that can now engage, say, for a team or for a family or for ultimately for yourself. You know, that's we want to have that oomph for ourselves intrinsically, as well as for the team. So that gradual overcoming of those small fears can ultimately build a resilient, courageous person as a whole. So fear as the path is interesting. That's a really interesting concept or way to look at it.
What do you think, Sean?
I like it because that's kind of how I've run my program for a while. And I mean, if something is a little scary, okay, consider me in because I know that that's what makes me a better human being. I've just faced it long enough, not to the degree of others and not to the intensity of others. I know people who have like orders of magnitude faced way more fear than I have. But here's the interesting part, at least from my perspective. It doesn't matter if all the howitzer shells in the world were all landing all around you, or whether you were just standing in a park. Fear is fear. And so I don't think, I do believe some of the people that I know out there feel that fear can only be faced like in war, or can only be faced in like highly traumatic events. But I think fear shows up in all kinds of places to the intensities that a lot of people would be surprised, that don't require a war, don't require super adverse conditions. Fear can be as simple as stepping out of your house for the first time in a couple of years and looking outside and seeing a different world than you saw 2 years ago, as the example. That uncomfortable, new, discombobulating event that is directly in front of your nose that perhaps you weren't prepared for at the level of intensity that it's coming at you, called the world. And so it's in those moments that you've got to decide, why did you take one step out of your front doorstep to face that new event? Well, irrespective of what your reason is, or irrespective of how intense the moment is, you've always got the option of taking one step back into your house and taking a breather and then edging back out again a little later that day. In other words, finding a way to face the adversity of the moment that you're putting yourself in actively, and managing actively, and understanding that you get to shape the velocity of the fear. And so, we'll call it fear inoculation training, for lack of a better term. One way to get better at facing the fears in life is to start facing the fears in life, but on your own terms. And that's how I've run my life. I do not like being up in a perfectly good airplane and climbing out onto its wing. Everything in me doesn't want to be there. But there's a part of me that understands that that's really good for Sean. And that's how Sean gets really good at things, because Sean likes to do things that freaks him out, because he understands the process of getting better at things. So I encourage everyone to go face their fears, or go find new fears, or dial up your fears to a degree that you've maybe never faced before, full well knowing that you can always dial back the rotary dial if you need to.
I think that's awesome. Any thought? I got a thought here real quick, but Clay, you got anything on that?
No,
one?
go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. I was just thinking that I have a kind of construction mind, that it seems like as a foundation is to a house, fear is to courage, in that, without a foundation, a house will just topple and fall, right? So if you say you're courageous without actually recognizing any fear, that usually leads down a bad path, because you'll be braggadocious and you'll be, you'll overextend your ability. But if you build your courage through consistently utilizing your fear, that will build a much more sturdy foundation to build your house upon. And to your point, Sean, in terms of intensity, you can build your house as big as you want it to, right? So you can create a really broad foundation by stepping into multiple fears over time to build a really solid foundation for your house of courage, for lack of a better term, and that way you can live in that house, and it doesn't matter what else comes at you, because you have a really strong foundation. What do you guys think of?
I like it, because here's the imagery that popped into my head. And I mean, it's a good visual model. You could have told a different story or a different analogy or whatever, and I'm sure it would have worked just as well. But the visual imagery that comes to mind is when someone's first in the game of facing their fears, they're like in a rattly old tin shack. That when the wind's blowing, that tin's rattling, which is really annoying. And so when you're first starting off in the game of facing your fears, you're in a bit of a hobo hangout that you should be looking around thinking, I don't like this rattly old thing that's going to fall down at any minute. I'm going to start building a better foundation. I'm going to start building towards a mansion where I can strongly engage in fear. I'm not gonna build a mansion. I'm gonna build a forward operating base that I can fight out of. So I think your visual example is real good, Chance, because again, in my head, I saw that rattly old beginning sort of lifestyle of this is where I'm going to live. Are you kidding me? Versus, oh, that's where I want to go put down some heavy fire support.
Mm-hmm. Clay, you got any thoughts?
It brings to mind David Goggins in his book, and he's a lot of people have different opinions about David Goggins, but he has a lot of really good. They're almost monk-like whims or quotes and sayings, but he has one in his first book where he talks about the cookie jar, and it's where I'll use jiu-jitsu as an example. You want to compete in jiu-jitsu, but you haven't even started. So competing is this big scary thing that you don't even have the courage for yet. But over time, you enter into the gym, which is the first huge step of courage. But then 2 weeks later, you start to understand this. And, 2 months later, you start to understand this. And then 3 months into it, as a white belt, you submit your first blue belt. You put that in the cookie jar. You've overcome the fear. You've entered into the space that you don't know. And now you're exercising small meta courage or whatever you want to call it. And eventually you take all of these little cookie jar moments in your life where you looked under the bed or where you rappelled off of a tower before you rappelled off of a helicopter. And eventually over time, all of those cookie jar exposures, you put them in there, and now you can go compete. Now you can start to face life. Now you can start to become that. But if you don't build that foundation, like you were saying, then you're gonna become comfortable running away from the fear instead of approaching it. And I think that's a huge point, is that the exposure and willful movement towards the fear is what builds that foundation so that you can ultimately have the courage in life, really, I guess, just in general.
Yeah. Sean, you got any thoughts on that?
I do. And so that was so well said. Thank you. I'm going to use an example of maybe an individual who has been a veteran and they have been out of the military for a while, and they haven't done anything of note to face their new fears. They have been, we'll call it, wallowing in fear, but not facing the fear. And so the fear might be all kinds of things. It might be fear of reconnecting with other veterans. It might be the fear of reconnecting with the guy down the street. Lots of fears out there. And until people start facing those fears, they're not really building up their courage yet. In their own mind, they're still reliving their glory days of when they did face fear with other people. We'll call them when they were actively serving in the military. And so it's really easy when you're surrounded by a brotherhood to face fears because the guy to your left and right is in the game with you. And if you're starting to waffle a little bit, or if you're starting to fade a little bit, or you're starting to feel like that's a bit too much fear, you can always proceed forward based on the guy to your left and right. And it's that encouraging tidal wave of let's go be courageous as a team that will sometimes carry a person across the finish line. However, with veterans who've been out for a while, now they're not on a team. They're in their house by themselves, facing those fears and maybe not having the courage to smash them. And so without a team around them, they're kind of stuck in a fear loop of inaction or the belief that they're not enough by themselves in isolation to face some of these fears. And so what do you guys have any thoughts on that?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
sorry, my bad.
No, go ahead.
This is what I am mostly interested in is the veterans who serve and then they get out, and it's exactly what you're saying. And why does that happen? Now, I don't have answers to that. I
Oh,
want
Clay, come
to.
on. I mean,
I,
I'm like,
yeah.
I'm on the edge of my seat hoping that you got the silver bullet.
No, I don't. I think that the silver bullet is exactly what you said. It's community. But man, how to find that? In our last podcast, Seb, I believe, was talking about how it's easier to find friends in the military, and I think all of us kind of agreed that it was consistent character through adversity, and that's how you know you can trust that person. And it's pretty easy in a military context because you go through so much that's obviously pulls out your character. But in the civilian world, as a former military member, it's so hard to find and trust just everyday ordinary people. It's hard to build a community, so how do we encourage or find or help veterans find that community, whatever it may be to them, is the silver bullet, I guess. That's the best I have for now, but it's a really, really pivotal issue, especially now that Iraq is done and Afghanistan, for all we know, is pretty much died down. We're going to have all these people my age, younger, older, that are going to be in desperate need of that community, and to face the help and assistance and the courage to ask for help when they're having trouble facing their everyday fears.
Yeah, it's a tough one. It is a puzzle that I've been trying to unravel for a little while. There's always a way. I mean, there is always a way. I know that to be true. We will always find a way. That is a motto that is on a patch that I kind of dig. So there's always a way to solve these kind of things, and it's through these kind of conversations that we get a little bit closer. Just the simple fact that you're considering this as a strong problem or an issue or a large consideration coming up in the near future. As you said, there's going to be more and more veterans who are more and more facing these kind of fearful moments without finding a way out of the fear and heading towards courage again. I do believe that BJJ is certainly a massive opportunity for veterans out there to not only engage in their fears that they have, whatever those fears might be, but more importantly, not just facing themselves in BJJ, but observing others face themselves in BJJ. Because as we all know, whatever fears I have on the mats are probably different than the fears of the guy next to me and the guy over leaning against the wall and the guy coming through the door at that moment. Everyone has their own luggage that they're carrying around, and it's all different luggage. But I found on the mats that in time, the luggage starts getting stripped out of the conversation, because in time, people connect on the mats, and in time, the conversations start opening up. People start feeling more comfortable with each other. That connection with another human being is something that I feel a lot of veterans would benefit from. However, stepping onto the mats as a veteran can be a fearful thing, particularly if in your head you think you're Captain America right now based on 15 years ago when you used to be Captain America. Well, that is an entire fear unto itself, where you are about to expose your shortcomings that you're fully aware of. The cognitive dissonance in your head is, I'm Captain America, but I know I'm not Captain America. I can't see my toes right now, so I'm obviously not Captain America. That cognitive dissonance on the mat is what I think keeps a lot of veterans off. The lie they tell themselves as to who they are versus the reality of who they are right now. But it doesn't have to be that way, because you can think all you want to think about the past, but all you've got is the now. But the now that's troubling you can be fixed. in the near future by you simply engaging in the fearfulness of facing up to what's going on and understanding that through a bit of courage, you're going to an order of magnitude make yourself more awesome in time. It might be 3 months, it might be 6 months, it might be a year, but in time on the BJJ mats, you're going to be able to, in pretty short order, look backwards and think, oh, yeah, that was a good move.
Clay, you got any thoughts? I got something rattling in my head right now, but
No, let it ride.
so I right after I got some comments to hit after this too, but I just as you were talking, Sean, it really kind of dawned on me that what was the mindset when we went into basic training, right? Of just okay, right? What do I got to do now? This okay. This I got to do that now. Okay, we're gonna do that. But there was this. I think everybody walking in to the front gates or wherever you went to serve, whenever you went to do your training, on that first day of you are completely in the unknown now. Doesn't matter how much you've prepped, doesn't matter how much you've researched, doesn't matter how much you've thought about it. That day one attitude when you just are standing there in the footprints or along the wall or in line or however they had you set up for it at the first day, that introduction to fear, I think, is what we need to remember as veterans. Because that is, I think, how we pass through these issues. And over time, that in my experiences, Sean was listing off all the things. I was like, yeah, that was me. That was me. That was me. And then you said, I couldn't see my feet. And I was like, well, I can see my feet. And that I could when I started. So I wasn't talking about me. But I think the point that I'm trying to make is the fact that we've done it before. And we've done it on our own as we introduced ourselves to that community. Right? We were lone single people when we walked into basic training. And when we walked out, we were a team. And I think that that is the mentality that we need to start looking at as a veteran and going back, looking at that in our own lives and saying, how do I take that mindset and I apply it to now? Because that's the mindset that we got through it. At least for me, it was, okay, what do you need me to do? And I just, cool, I need to go there? Cool, I'll do that. And then I started working with my team, and then I started working, and it allowed me to just flow into that moment rather than be worried about what was coming next because I was just open to it. That was my personal experience, but I think that's something that we can lean on because we all have that experience. What do you guys think? Sean?
Well, I like the idea because what it should reinforce to every veteran out there or anyone who's been through some sort of an institutional, we'll call it a selection process, is when you stepped in, I stepped in with a bad haircut. And the moment that that day one started happening, here's what I thought, because I didn't know anything about basic training in battle school. I thought this. I'll give her. I'll do my best, but I don't know how this whole thing works, but they do, and so I'll trust them. So that's what I did. I trusted the process. A process that I couldn't even spell at that time. Is it two S's in process or one S? I had no idea about the process, but I stepped in, thought I'm going to try to kick its ass, whatever it is, and I engaged in the process. Well, the process turned out not a bad product for sure. And so I think that's my perspective on things. I'll trust the process. But for others, it might have been stepping into the basic training scenario and thinking, I need the money, or I need to get away from my girlfriend, or I just need to leave my parents, or I want to step into this thing, put up with it so that I can go to school later. Like, I'm sure there's a boatload of reasons that people can join. But for me, it was, I want to get involved in this thing, and I'm going to trust the process.
Yeah. Clay, what do you think?
Yeah, I always used to say that people join the military for two reasons: inspiration or desperation. And it's kind of, you get the guys who come in and they're inspired. They're and then you get the guys who come in, much like myself, where it's a lot of those things that you listed off, where it's maybe I got something pregnant too early, or I need to get, just a number of things. But I think all in all, especially with jiu-jitsu or kickboxing or whichever pursuit it is, it's the willful pursuit of adversity and discomfort that makes you respect the people in the room. And then another layer to that is being able to consistently stick around for that willful adversity. Because I have a running theory, and this is a little off topic, but the more comfortable a society gets, or a person, the more comfortable life is, the more mental issues it may have, because we're not really built to be just always 70-degree cave. My food's in the refrigerator. My, everything is just, it's so easy now, and we don't pursue discomfort at all. That's just the old military adage, comfort is the enemy of progress. If you don't face fears, it could be, especially as a veteran, that you're comfortable. You're comfortable. You don't want to go outside and do all of those things, like be in the rain or ruck march or get choked out by a lower belt. No, it's hard to do those things again, especially if you have what you were saying, Sean. You have the ability to look back and be like, well, I was like that once. I used to be like that before, but now you got to do it all again. You got to have day one attitude,
Yeah, it's
and
like a
it's
double
hard.
fear. It's a double fear because the lie that someone might have been telling themselves for a decade about how large and in charge they were, now they're getting close to the start line of facing up to their own lie. And it's not just the fear of stepping into the unknown, it's the fear of stepping into the unknown plus knowing what you've been telling yourself for about a decade and knowing that it ain't true. That cognitive dissonance is a stinger, but the sooner you get involved with pulling that stinger out, is the sooner that you start getting real with yourself and you start getting better at life by facing up to what's going on. The only way that you can become more awesome is to realize who you are right now and then start building off it, start improving it. You'll never, I say you'll never, I think it's rare that someone will improve themselves to their full potential without facing up to the fact that who they are right now could be better in all aspects of life, to whatever degree. 1% better is enough. So it's really easy for someone who's been in comfort for a long, long time to just stay comfortable and not face up to the uncomfortable truth, as it were.
I have I have a great picture in my head. It goes back to the initial analogy that you made, Sean, of the tin shack, the ramshackle hut, and I'm picturing, a vet sitting in there with his little fire going, and he's like, "Okay, I'm comfortable right now. I'm comfortable right here." And when he looks outside, he sees people walking around in the rain, trying to collect other stuff, trying to make bricks, trying to do whatever to build their own foundations. And as you said, they're comfortable, but it's a perception of comfort, right? It is, and I'm looking back on my own life, and that I was not actually comfortable living the life that I was living, right? I was, suffering PTSD symptoms all over the place. I couldn't get out of my basement, couldn't deal with crowds, couldn't do da 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 da, all these things. And yet I can now, based off the fact that I looked at it and said, and actually saw that I wasn't actually comfortable, right? I had just kind of, I had settled for what was. I was like,
You're
okay, well, I
comfortable
guess
with your lie, is what you were comfortable
comfortable with
with.
the lie, exactly, yes. And that's where it struck me, was the fact that once you realize it is a lie, then you realize you're not actually comfortable. And it's only through all of the effort to get through all the other side, to get through all the issues, that you can become comfortable. And that is when you have a solid foundation built and you're sitting in your house and the storm is raging outside, and you can say, all right, what do you got next? And just
Yeah.
and keep working it forward. Now I got a bunch of comments here, but any thoughts before I dive into these?
I guess one last thing while I have it is so I think it was Sean. I think so, but it's not that there are actual physical fears. It's not as much that. I won't say it's not that, because obviously there's danger in the world, but it's the self-imposed and the mentally created fears or lies that we aren't facing, that need to be sought out by the individual. It's the self-imposed, it's the self-created lies that once we notice them and then face them, that is where true courage lies. I think that's really, really interesting. It's funny how we say it at the beginning, and then after the conversation, it all makes sense.
Sinks in, gels in. Yeah.
It just gels. But yeah, I just wanted to share that because it seems to all kind of mesh together with what we're all saying. It's interesting.
Absolutely.
There is one thing,
Yep,
Chance,
you're right.
on the aspect of facing the fears of stepping out of your basement or getting uncomfortable, etc. I do believe that, and this is not the case with everyone, but I do believe that most of the time, the individual who's in their basement ain't going to get out of the basement by themselves because they're freaking comfortable. If you've been comfortable for a decade, you don't wake up like 10 years and one day into it and think, wow, I have been lying to myself every day for the last 10 years, and I know it. Today's the day that I'm going to do something about it. No, it ain't. It'll be year 11 and year 12 and year 27 of Netflix. I just got to keep watching Netflix. And so I don't think it's that common for someone to snap to the enlightened state of, what a lie that has been. It usually takes someone to bark at them or encourage them or cajole them or lever them out of their basement in whatever manner to get them back in the game of not lying to themselves. I don't think you don't wake up one morning and snap to. You usually wake up one morning and someone snaps you to.
I'm going to push back a little bit on that one. And I think you're right. It does usually take someone else to kind of show you, but it can happen in terms of like a traumatic event. Because there's lots of people that all of a sudden, they get diagnosed with cancer and they're just like, oh no. And they change their lives completely. Or, their spouse has a heart attack and they're like, oh. So I think sometimes it more than likely is thrust upon you. It may be through your friends, it may be through your family, it might be through circumstance, but there are people out there that sometimes have just, you know what, I have been living a lie. And
yeah,
then
I'll agree
but it's
with
rare.
that. I agree that a person can snap to through external stimulus of all kinds. What I'm saying is, it's not that common that the person snaps to based on their internal stimulus.
100%. Okay, so we got a couple comments here, some questions and stuff, but I think we're doing pretty well. So 0797 says, do you guys have fear? If so, each of you guys name them. What are some ways you guys learn to cope with fear or a situation that takes courage? I think we've hit on that point pretty well, unless there's something in there that you guys wanted to touch on.
For me, it's heights, and anytime that I'm height related, I do it for the team.
Clay, what do you think?
That's a good one. I mean, I have fear. Yeah, I'm also afraid of heights. My fear a lot of the times is not reaching for full transparency, like the potential that I could in myself. I fear that, and to some degree. And I guess how I cope with that, that's a good one. I guess I just keep trying to do the next right thing. As hard, it's easy to say, but that's a very difficult path to take. So yeah, my fear is probably not reaching the potential, not only for myself, but for, everyone around me, yeah.
You know what, Clay? I want to ride your coattails on that a little bit because I do feel a little bit of that myself. And that's a whole sort of soup bowl full of imposter syndrome versus performing for the team versus performing for the planet versus performing for myself versus not wanting to do it but knowing that I have to do it. It's so many things in that complex soup bowl. But I will say this, and again, because you almost prompted me to, this podcasting thing, man, it's so frustrating, and I so sometimes don't want to be involved in it, but I do it every single day, and it's not just for the team because that's enough. But I also know myself, and I know that when I engage in something, like it's going to get done. And so I will see my potential, maybe not my full potential, but I'll see enough of my potential in podcasting that years from now, I'll consider it as acceptable. But for right now, I'm still kind of in not the fear zone, but I'm in that nebulous gray zone of constantly checking under the bed for the monster and realizing, is there one there or isn't there one there? I got to move out of this loop. I got to own my stuff. And so I'm now stepping into that and have been for maybe a couple of weeks where I'm starting to see the end state of whatever, man. I just squashed that monster's head and now it's time to go kick that ass. So it takes me a while to kind of get with the program of moving out of the fear through the nebulous gray zone and then into owning the trajectory. The only reason I can do that is because I've got the faith that in the past, whenever I sink my teeth into something, it just freaking gets done. But that requires daily commitment. That requires belief in the process of everyday consistency in time will get me to a point where it's a non-factor, where I can do what I want to do with the moment rather than facing the fear of the moment.
I think my answer to this one is it's tricky, but I've been thinking about it while you guys have been talking, and my biggest fear would definitely be being incapable. That's my consistent driving fear that keeps me learning new things and keeps me building skill sets that I have, is being physically incapable to react to a situation. And so I consistently try to give myself enough skills in a lot of things that has ended up turning into not much skill in anything. So this is one of the parts that I'm dealing with as we go along. So moving on, Tanya, I'm going to come to your question in a second because that's a good one. Salty Jinx says, late to the game today. He says, if you're afraid of it, it means it's important and you should be moving towards it. I agree with that 100%.
I agree.
Winterstorm says, we will always find a way. Powerful. It's a great one. For those that don't know, this is the motto of the Canadian Special Operations Regiment. They are hard chargers. We got Winterstorm says, we as a society need to look to veterans and say in unity, we got you, especially if I live in the protection they provided. You may have fear, but I want you to know that I'll be right next to you, no matter what you're going through or being challenged by. This is a great sentiment. I'm going to push back on it a little bit, and I don't think that as a society we need to. I think as veterans we need to stand up and say, I got myself, and then work towards the community rather than having the community work towards us, in my mind. What do you guys think?
I think it should be mutual. I think it should be a mutually supportive relationship, not mutually exclusive, but mutually relationship. And of course, Windstorm 427, who of course serves, and I think that he understands this well because he's in the game. But not everyone understands the sentiment that he just passed on, and I don't want to turn society upside down by saying you all got to represent as veterans, and everyone who isn't a veteran, you all got to represent and do your part for veterans. I think that there's a middle ground that could be dialed up by 10% that would be more appropriate, but I don't think it needs to swing to 1,004%. So, yeah.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I think what he said is Winter Storm 427. It opens up the avenue for veterans to receive that, and I think it's hard for a lot of veterans to receive the community being there for them, because a lot of the times, like I've seen it a lot in substance abuse. In substance abuse, if you were not an addict, addicts don't want to hear you, and veterans kind of have that mentality as well in some sense of like, well, if you're not a veteran, then I don't want to hear you. And when someone, opens that door for reception, like, hey, we've got you, whether or not you want it, that's fine. I think it's exactly what you guys are saying of it does need to be mutual, but also veterans, we kind of need to open up a little bit to receive what people are telling us in that way from the community. I think it's hard though, you know.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely. Tanya says, through a firearms basics course, initially my terror paralyzed me. In that course, I learned to dial down my fear to manageable levels and do what is needed. Learning to work with fear was pivotal. 100%. Salty Jinx says, Hannibal Barca quotes, if I can't find a way, I'll make one. That's a great quote.
That's how I
References that
think, man.
quote.
I
Yeah.
mean, is that not how you guys think? Like, if there's a problem, it's going to get smashed and I'm going to create a new solution. That's how I think all the time. And that's the thought process that I've had in my mind for decades now. And I was taught that in tier 1. If there's a problem, it ain't a problem. It's just a matter of time until I smash it. And so if I've got enough resources, time and money, it'll get done faster. If I've got less resources, time and money, it'll take longer, but it's still going to get smashed. So the old saying used to be, make a hole, make it wide, because I'm coming through. And that's kind of how I like to run my life.
I like it. Let's carry on with these just real quick, and then we'll do some final thoughts. Winterstorm says, fear and discomfort are strong motivators, but make sure you're moving in the right direction. And I think this is crucial as well.
Yes, but in absence of the right direction, when you're turning circles in your basement, you haven't stepped out of your basement for a decade, in absence of a direction, frickin' just walk out your door and start walking. Don't worry about the direction. Get to action.
Pick a direction and move. I like it. Salty Jinx says, Sean, 11 years in that basement and 8 years of work to dig the stairs out to get to the sunlight. You're exactly right. There you go. Tanya says, for those without a team just yet, build one in your head. I do things for the future me, as the cost of buying into my fear is that I'll make my future very small. Yet 100%. That's a good way of doing it.
Well, another good way of doing it is to not just for yourself, but to double down and do it for the team. So build a team in your head, start moving forward in a direction that's improving you, always with the overarching theme of you're doing it for you, but mostly you're doing it for the team that needs you to do it.
100%. And then Tanya says, thanks, Salty Jinx, thanks. When you realize that your soul/future is at risk, it makes it worth facing little fears like podcast appearances. Most don't know the true cost until it's too late. That is 100% correct. And then we got this one last, says, more to my point from Winterstorm, more to my point, I can't climb the ladder for you. That's on you. But I can stand and hold the ladder so you don't fall because you're on your own. That is 100% meeting in the middle, for sure. Okay, so now I got this one last question, and we'll use it as final thoughts because it is a great one. Tanya says, what would be some more subtle examples of the courage loop, short of facing down Godzilla, so us average folks have a jump-off point to implement in our day-to-day? So let's do this as a final thought. What would be a good example of facing the fear through to having courage and managing it? Clay, and go from there.
Can you put the question up
Yep,
so I can see
absolutely.
it?
Here we go.
So some examples. A subtle example of the courage loop, short of facing down Godzilla. So I can only use, my own perspective to answer that question. But I mean, believe it or not, I'm a purple belt in jiu-jitsu, and I've been doing combat sports since 2008 in some capacity. But a subtle example of fear is, even to this day, if I'm out of the gym for 2 or 3 days or for a week, like there's a fear of starting again. Like there's a fear of going back, and seeing everyone and what did you miss and who's gotten better. And it never fails that each time I go back and I do take the long drive and I'm thinking about all the things that could happen and how I've been missing and how I've not, lived up to this or not been that. And then I step into the gym. It's never as bad as I thought it was going to be in my head. And so that small piece of courage of just showing up is a subtle loop to now I'm going to continue on for 5 more years, or 6 more years. It's a very subtle thing that happens. I think it happens to most people. Some people don't want to admit it, but it's a real small thing in life, but it turns into like a really big thing for me.
100%. Sean?
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think that what I was hearing from Clay is consistency is courageous.
Hmm.
Am I wrong? I mean, if I
No.
was to crystallize it, and I agree that being consistent in life is a small form of courage in life. And so, to again play off what Clay stated, I think that a good subtle example of the courage loop is understanding that you need to get out of your basement, not live in your decade old Captain America vision of yourself, and do something new. We'll call that new thing BJJ. And the subtle approach to entering into that courage loop is if you can't do it by yourself, go with a fire team partner, go with your buddy. And that support, that fire team support, should be enough to get you across the start line of the BJJ mats. And then as you engage in the courage of consistency, when you feel yourself wavering or faltering a little bit, well, you gotta meet the standard of you're gonna be picking up your buddy in 20 minutes so that you can both go to the BJJ mats. So find a fire team partner that you've got to be accountable to, and they've got to be accountable to themselves. So that accountability loop builds the consistency loop, which creates the courage loop, as it were.
Yeah, those are fantastic. Are there any other thoughts or anything else before we shut her down? Clay, got anything left rattling around?
No, no other than taking responsibility and attacking your fears for yourself is how you help everyone around you. So that's my small tidbit for the end.
That's a great one. Sean, you got anything percolating?
No, that's Clay wrapped it up just nicely.
With a little bow on top too. It's fantastic. I really appreciate Clay that you joining us again. And like I said, I'm going to be bugging you to be on more often. Don't you
Sure.
worry. And all the people watching and all the people commenting, thank you very much. And if you have faced your fears and you found the courage loop, by all means, throw it in the comments. We read them all, so hit us up because that helps us algorithmically. Going back to that word because I love it. And as we all learn about our fears and build those fears into courage, we can grow into the person that we're supposed to be. And you can do that with us every day here on The Collective. We'll see y'all tomorrow. Chimo.
Chimo.